This is the part that I feel in my experience of dealing with writers over the years through Broadleaf and other organizations and such. And this is actually a part that I think gets um, overlooked a lot. The whole end of a story, and so what we want to make sure we do is cover the areas that come into this third act, into this final portion of your book, whether it's 20-25% roughly of your story, because you've spent, let's say for the sake of numbers here, that let's say this is 20% of your novel. You have spent 80% of your story getting to this point. And if you were 80% of the way to the store and then just kind of coasted and stopped paying attention, and who knows if you'd get there or not, that would make a lot of sense. So, if you're writing the story, you spent all this time and energy, and we spend a lot of time writing it. Why get to this part of it and not put as much, if not more, effort into it? Because this is what people will remember you for. If you can close out a book with the same, work ethic and adherence to these elements as you've done this whole way, you can tell a great story from start to finish. People are going to be eager and ready for that next one. If, however, you come up short, or you skip, or you rush to get to the end, or you make it too easy, then readers, or in the case of movies, viewers are going to remember that part of it, and that's really what they're going to remember more than anything. And that's actually one of the elements here that are one of the things I wanted to be able to lead with here. And so what we'll do is we'll get started. I have a lot to talk about in this section, but I also going to leave time for questions. And then there's a couple other things that if we have time that I wanted to also cover that weren't part of this particular seminar. So let's get us going here. Actually, before I do this, I want to make sure that, and I'll say this again, but thank you for registering. Thank you for being here as much, because yay, you're here and I get to do this. But also for you, I come back to it a lot, in investing in yourself and putting yourself out there and being a part of something that can help you grow as an artist and as an individual. It's a small piece of the puzzle being here on a Saturday for a full day of storytelling talk, but it's also a very big step for you. And you can take this information and hopefully grow as a writer, and hopefully forge connections from the people here. For those of you on social media, connect with one another. You have a shared experience here, and you have something that you can talk about, and hopefully, connect with me. Definitely. I always invite that. I am an open book on social media and everything. So find me, connect with me, keep up with me in emails, keep up with each other. This is one of those moments where you as a writer can expand your circle. And I definitely recommend you do that. Okay. Part 4. All right. This one is learning the lesson, going home, and the finale. And there are some other points in there that I actually throw in. So when last we saw Andy, he was hurtling toward a car, improbably hurtling toward a car. I'm still part of me that's like, there are brakes on the bike, and I know that they work on his because he used them. I'm still trying to figure out how he approached a car and didn't stop or didn't swerve. But hey, that's nitpicking, right? There are much bigger fish to fry here. So anyway, while pursuing Trish on his bike, Andy collides with her car and flies through the side of a billboard truck. She rushes out of her car over to his side, They have a nice little tender moment, and Andy finally confesses that he's a virgin. Trish is relieved and accepting of that, wondering why he didn't say it to begin with, and the two profess their love for one another. They eventually marry in a lavish ceremony with everyone in attendance, having generated roughly a for both the wedding and for his new business venture. And then they proceed to have sex for the first time. Now, this is where the movie falls flat. Well, not just a little flat, but it falls like really flat. If it doesn't fall flat, it's just lazy storytelling. And honestly, this is where you can find this stuff online. Is like this, just the visceral reaction to the end of this story, to what was a perfectly charming and at times very funny movie to this point. What people want to talk about is the end of this story. And I mean, you'd think the entire culmination of this journey would be, Andy finally letting go of his unconscious misbelief, that realizing it isn't that big a deal to be a virgin, and that Trish is more than just an opportunity to resolve that matter. But no, I mean, yes, that is definitely part of it. But that's not where this ends. Andy doesn't really struggle or lose everything or wonder how he'll ever resolve his life or have the bravery to tell her that it just happens. It happens in a hurry. It happens after we were just finishing that wonderful story element from the second part of the bad guys closing in, and the screws getting tightened. And there was this big moment where, she's running out with this misconception of him. And it's all because he wasn't able to let go of this misbelief, and he wasn't able to be truthful. Only after he's given himself over to the truth does he finally give up the things in his life that matter most. His collection of toys, his life as a single man, his job, going out on his own. So why use this movie the whole time if in the end it doesn't align with what we're trying to learn here? And for that, I have two answers. One, you can tell a pretty good story without hitting every single element that we've discussed. And absolutely. I mean, I would watch this movie again if it was on. Would I pay money to watch it again? No. Would I seek it out? Probably not. But if it was on, I would absolutely watch it, at least until it got to the point where he flew through the sign. And the second reason that I say this or that I use this, is that they did such a great job of leading up to this point. They did such a great job of adhering to necessary elements of a story, and really being able to bring the characters along, and just the slightest little tweak, and it wouldn't have gotten such terrible reviews and feedback, and wouldn't have been called lazy or disappointing or some of the things that reviewers actually called it. So the question that leaves us is, how do we fix it? Or better, how do we avoid having this kind of thing happen? The most important thing is we need our characters to grow. They need to struggle and suffer and be forced. And please let me repeat that word, forced, to finally let go and change. It's not supposed to be easy. I mean, look at your life, all the changes that you have been through. Was it easy? Hell no. Nothing about life is easy. And that's okay, because I mean, in the end, what do we actually learn if we're just handed change? So through successes and failures, your protagonist has resisted change at every turn. And again, going back to reaction to action, the reaction your protagonist is going to have to every single thing presented is resistance. Even if, let's talk about 40-Year-Old Virgin, even if it's resistance to his friends' advice and the desire to just figure it out on his own. That was a resistance to what they were handing him, to what they were trying to force him to do. And he resisted and did his own thing, but then within that own thing began to resist the reality that he was starting to face, that he had actually found somebody that he was connecting with, and that he was eventually going to have that moment where he had to finally perform. But they're not there yet. They need to grow, and they will get there, but they're just not there yet. So with the 40-year-old virgin, instead of taking these last few steps, they went from the sort of end of the bad guys bit with her finding out or finding this porn and leaving in a rush, believing he was a terrible person. They rushed to go ahead and get to like, okay, well, now he's just going to change. He may have to fly through a sign, off of a bike to get there, but that was like that little microcosm of a moment that was the entirety of it. They still think that their way is better at this point. And their resistance, I keep using this word, but the resistance is at an all-time high. It's absolutely, it's absolutely, you sense the end coming. They sense the end coming. They sense the change coming, and they are now desperately trying to avoid it. And all of this is part of the rubber band effect. And there's different ways that you can phrase this. I think actually this is used in Save the Cat. It's just that rubber band effect. And just think about a rubber band, you've got it between your fingers, you're pulling it all the way back, and it's snapping. And so with every one of these reactions to action, it's the same thing. The action is the pulling the rubber band back. The reaction is it snapping forward and possibly blistering your fingers because, it's a rubber band. So it's essentially a vehicle to getting your protagonist to change is the main thing there. But again, that's life. That's our reality. That's what we deal with. And this is where your protagonist must do the absolute dumbest thing or make the worst decision they can possibly make. And I always referred to this as the hold my beer moment, because there's always that moment where they feel like, come hell or high water, they know better. And this is the way, and I'm going to hold on to this with everything I've got. I'm going to give up everything that I feel I can possibly give up just to ensure that I don't have to get there. Which of course leads us to the next thing, because the reaction to that is going to be pretty bad. And this is known as rock bottom. Again, I would think about life and think about whether it is your life or whether it's somebody else's life. But that moment of rock bottom where for whatever reason, whatever struggles you or somebody else have been through, that they hit that lowest of low points where you're just absolutely confident it's just never going to get worse than this. It's never going to get better than this. This is it. This is as far as I can go. And what rock bottom does is it takes all these questions that have haunted your protagonist, and it leads to these new questions of like, how the hell did I get here? Why did this happen to me of all people? Why couldn't this happen to somebody else? And then the ultimate question of, what could I have done differently? Save the Cat calls this section All Is Lost, followed by The Dark Night of the Soul. And I reference them only because, again, the story beats are really cool concepts to learn. And even if you're not following Save the Cat, they really will help you with your storytelling and help you to understand why things must happen and where they must happen in your book. And they describe these very well. I mean, all is lost is pretty obvious. It is your character has lost everything, and they are left with this sort of brooding stage of contemplation. Most importantly, they realize that it's time for a change. That everything that they have done has led them to this moment, and that because things have gotten so bad, because they have lost everything, because they feel like it is the worst point of their life. They feel like they have to change in order to come out of it. So, like the catalyst, this is something that happens to your character. Your protagonist is entirely the cause of this, that rubber band effect, but it has to be something that happens to your character. Again, their actions are creating the reaction that has taken them to the absolute bottom, to the pit of despair. It's an insurmountable event that leaves your protagonist somehow worse off than when they began. Isolated and alone, once again, likely because most stories will into isolation and aloneness in the beginning, especially if you're dealing with fantasy stories. That seems to be a trope that is repeatedly done by me as well as other people. But it's one of those things that it creates this sense of isolation for your character, whether they were alone to begin with or not, and they have only themselves to blame. Now, this is the point of the story where you really have to not be afraid to kill characters, fire people, tear down buildings and bridges, be relentless, because this is the world is crumbling phase. This is where everything has to be at its worst. And the only way you can get there is for these monumental events to happen in the proximity of your character to your character, whatever it happens to be. In many ways, this is kind of like, a repeat. And you see this throughout this whole storytelling process, these sort of cyclical elements. It's not just a repeat of the catalyst, it's a repeat of the brand new world. So, in the beginning, where we had this sort of established world that we turned upside down for the inciting event, turned the world upside down for your protagonist. Now we're at rock bottom, and it's going to completely change the world again, but this time proactively, because rather than them sort of being a passenger to it to begin with, now they're going to try to control it. They're going to try to be, the architect of change, and they are the ones that are going to redefine what their world is. And if you think of the combination of the A and B stories, it is very often a combination of that first world and the new world. So your protagonist has to feel that nothing could be worse, that they've lost everything, and that they can't see a way out. Now, when I've had a bad day, I can tell you that what I want more than anything is something with cheese and no calorie restriction. That's my reaction to the day's action. I want comfort. I want familiarity. I want something I know that will bring me joy. But it doesn't change the day. It doesn't undo any damage that was caused, or any suffering that I had over the course of the day, or any mental, I guess, breakdown, wearing out, whatever it happens to be. It doesn't change any of that. It just gives me comfort. And I like to think that it's going to make things better. I just feel fat and happy for a little bit. And ultimately, whether I want to or not, I have to face the reality of the day. And so must it go with your protagonist. And this leads us to the "you can't go home" section. Daniel. Yes, no, Daniel, I always use enough cheese, I promise. Okay, so your character is at this point and they want to go home again. They want to go back to what they know. They want to forget all this change stuff. That's for other people, even though they know that they're responsible for this, even though they know that, that all of the stuff has happened subconsciously or consciously because of what they've done. Their reaction to this is to find something comfortable, let somebody else solve this for them, and they can't do it. Your protagonist is wallowing, they're brooding, they're being an all-around martyr as if they weren't the cause to begin with, even if they know they're the cause to begin with, because they don't want to. This is their last gasp. They're at rock bottom and they don't want to accept it. They have decided the best way to cope is to go backward, perhaps even further back to when they began. Back to the parents, to an old friend, to a father figure, to where they grew up, or even to the bar where they used to single hop. But the most important thing is they don't want to do this themselves. They're going to go back to something that was established in the opening of the story, whether it is a physical place or whether it is a concept or whatever it is. They're going to seek something familiar, something comforting, something that allows somebody else to take care of the problem. Now, what should have happened in the 40-Year-Old Virgin is in the moment that Trish flashed those magazines in his face, and in the video, I think there were videos too, and ran out of the door with the wrong idea, and not listening to anything he had to say. What should have happened is, if he was going to chase after her on a bicycle, he probably should have not come up to her, and largely because, I don't know, she's in a car and he's on a bike. That would seem reason enough for me, but I digress. At the very least, he should have not been able to catch up to her, or he should have just not gone after her at all, because that would have been a sort of change-like action where he, instead of letting things be, instead of allowing his resistance to win out, he would have, in that case, if he gotten on by getting on the bike, he was basically saying, "Here is my change," and it would have worked a lot better if he had just decided, I'm better this way. I knew I was better this way to begin with. I told everybody I was better this way to begin with. I don't really care. Sex is not for me. I am fine with my toys, with my job, with my life as it is. That is something he was familiar with. That is where we found him. That is what he believes his life should be, even if he still desires something different. Sorry, cat moment there. This would have forced him to reconcile his desire and his unconscious misbelief. He had a fantastic time with Trish. He loved her. He even made good with her daughter, and let her know the truth. And in his eyes, his life was better. That was advancement for him. Look at that. Look at what I did. I actually put myself out there. It proved that I was right, but I put myself out there. He would have seen in that instance, or would have believed, that his toys were the answer. But in going back to it, after having experienced his time with Trish, after for the first time in his life understanding love, and at least physically getting close to his resolution of this whole virginity thing, and even connecting with her daughter in that moment in the health clinic, he would have seen that his life was better in that, and that his toys and his job and even his friends, to that degree, were not things that brought him real joy. They were masks. They were something that kept him from having to deal with a very, very difficult issue that he wasn't comfortable facing. He would have seen that his toys brought him no real joy, that his job was just an excuse to stay in his comfort zone. And of course, that his friends had a very, very terrible misconception about what a relationship was, which, we as viewers got to see as we were watching the film, which would have led to that moment. It would have led to the epiphany. Like, for example, in Bridesmaids, if you watch it, it's a very, very funny movie, and this one actually does hit all the things correctly. Annie goes through this whole resistance of her friend getting married and not wanting to let go of the life that she had known, and she resists and she makes stupid mistakes, obviously, because that's what works in comedy, and she basically ends up alienating herself from everybody, losing the place that she lives, having nowhere to turn. And so the only place she can go, the other resistance was not starting her bakery back up. The only place she can go is back home. And then when she gets home, this is what she finds, that it's not what it was once. It wasn't, it was comfortable and safe before, but it's not now. Or if we look at Harry Potter and the Sorcerer's Stone, they don't run back to a place, they don't run back to an idea. They run back after they've uncovered what they believe is the truth about the Sorcerer's Stone to find Professor Dumbledore, because hey, let's let Dumbledore solve this. Which yes, I mean that would be awesome because Dumbledore would have solved it, but he wasn't there, and so they were forced to. They went back to the familiar, they went back to the safe, but they're forced to realize in that moment that it was up to them, just like Annie was forced to realize that if she wanted her life to be better, it was up to her, or in the hypothetical ending to the 40-year-old virgin, that Andy would have realized that his life wasn't good enough as it was, and that what he really truly, or actually what he really truly needed, was to be able to tell Trish the truth and face his fears, to face that misbelief about himself. And what that brings us to is the epiphany. Home isn't enough. It isn't the same. Everything is different. Your protagonist is different, and they're finally seeing it. They're finally realizing that what they have to do is change. This is the epiphany, and this is the moment that it finally all clicks. Question is, what will they do now? They have this great understanding of themselves, this great understanding of everything that the only obstacles that are the obstacles that they put in their own way. What will they do now? This leads us to the finale. That's a real tough one to break down, right? Because what is the finale? Well, it's the ending, right? This is where your protagonist has to take action in their own hands. They no longer react to the action. They are the action. They no longer have things happen to them. They make things happen. They are going to do it the right way. So your protagonist is in action now, setting things right. And go back to the action and reaction. Through the entirety of this story, predominantly what we're dealing with is action that is happening to your character, to your protagonist, and your protagonist's reaction to that. You do have, as I had mentioned several times, that you do have those moments where your protagonist is the cause of action that is causing a negative reaction to it. But again, at this particular point in time, your protagonist is the action, and the reaction is going to come solely from the actions that they do, because what they're trying to do is they're trying to set this right. Unlike their actions prior, they rise above their flaws, their fatal flaws, to do things the right way, the right way that they need to be done. The unconscious misbelief is exposed. They are aware of it. They understand. If we go back to the idea of the rom-com with the guy who believes he's not the marrying type, or even the woman who believes she's not the marrying type, this would be the moment that they realize that that they found the person that they can be with, that they thought they were not the marrying type because they just kept choosing terrible people, or because they just kept resisting the idea that for one reason or another, probably because they believed they wouldn't be good at it. They wouldn't be a good partner. They were too selfish, or they just didn't want to give up too much of themselves. Kind of like Andy and his toys and his job and everything. They have to be able to realize in that moment that it's no longer enough. They have to realize what it is that has been keeping them from succeeding. So your protagonist must do this alone. They must face their internal bad guys on their own. It's an act that is transformative to their journey going forward. They're going to be everything they were not in the beginning. standing up to the antagonist, letting go of a crippling loss, giving everything up for one person, quitting the job to set on their own. If we think about Harry Potter and the Sorcerer's Stone, um, he's got Harry and Ron the whole time. They are right there by his side through this entire journey, and being there and being the smarts and then whatever you want Ron to represent, they help force Harry forward on his journey, and they even go down and go through these obstacles to the end with him. However, in the end, it has to be Harry versus Voldemort, and there's no different in any story. Again, Star Wars, it was Luke in the cockpit flying down the little chasm of the Death Star and pulling the trigger. And yeah, there were others, and yes, Han helped, but he was the one that had to make that happen. But it's not over yet. So yeah, there's still a long way to go. And there's still a lot in between your protagonist's epiphany and the very end of the story. And it's going to suck, because even though they've figured it out, it's going to be difficult, and they know it. Probably if I were to break it down from a psychology standpoint, they know it because they know that they're the ones that have created it. They know that they're the ones that have resisted it, and that in order to get through it, they're going to have to be something they didn't think they could be till this moment. But now that they have realized what that is, and now that they have accepted it, they are ready to push forward, even if there's an entire literal army in front of them. And it's necessary. This is necessary for your protagonist. It's necessary for your story. And eventually it's necessary for your reader. After all, it wasn't easy, but it was worth it. I mean, right? We've said that before about things. That moment, it wasn't easy, but it was worth it. We hated it maybe, but we got through it. So 40-Year-Old Virgin, Andy, he ends up selling all his stuff, but in doing this the correct way, he should have sold it all, then set out to make things right with Trish. He would have given it all up for his true self. He would have given it all up to be his true self, and had done it for her, had done it for love, had done it for the real thing that he needed in his life, rather than the desire, or rather than everything he thought that would help him resist it, everything that he believed believed wrongly of himself. Sure, he sells all his stuff and everything. But we all know that he wasn't going to just go to Trish and they were going to be happily ever after, and he was going to move all this shit into her place, right? So he has to be able to give it all up. And also in doing so, quit his job and start his own business. He should have done all this and then been ready to go back to her. In Bridesmaids, Annie realizes that she's been a jealous heel cake to her best friend and sets out to make it right by inviting Wilson Phillips to the wedding. Now, one might think having that kind of pull in your pocket would have been a better play earlier and probably avoided a lot of the nonsense. But it was nonsense she needed to endure to better herself and grow. And honestly, I'm just having fun. That is not her growth. Just that's a weird thing to be able to do, right? To just, suddenly have Wilson Phillips come to a wedding. Good moment visually. But yeah, hello. Anyway, but what Annie actually does is she goes back to baking. She had lost her business before and had resisted starting it again, even though the very charming Irish cop tried to talk her into it. Tried to support her and show her that she was really good about a very good baker, and that she should do this again. She resisted the entire thing the entire time. But she decides to put that business failure behind her and to overcome her misbelief that she wasn't capable of succeeding in anything, be that a business, a relationship, or a friendship. And Harry had to overcome the misbelief that he wasn't special, that he could never be the magical hero that everyone claimed him to be, and that he could defeat the most powerful dark wizard ever alone. And with that, that is all I've got. But before we get to questions, I just wanted to leave you with some info again. Broadleafwriters.com. We are on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. And of course, like I said, YouTube, Broadleaf Writers Association. You can find all of the videos we have there, all of the programs that we have recorded. If you are on Facebook and want to be a part of the Broadleaf Writers community page, we have one of those on Facebook. You just go in and join, and we approve you, and you just enjoy it. Ask questions, look for critique groups, beta readers, connect. Talk about writing, join conversations, be present. And of course, with me, Zach at broadleafwriters.com. I am on Facebook. I am on Twitter. Fortunately, long enough that I actually got to have one that represents my name. Instagram, and then I do have a website that is very difficult to remember. It is my name. So again, find us, follow us, join us. Okay. So questions, let me know. I'm sure you got them. And while you think about them and while you type them in, because you all have questions and you want them answered, because they are plaguing your mind and you just need some information. And now is the best time to ask. One of the other things that I wanted to talk about is first page. This is not an element of storytelling. This is just nuts and bolts of writing, but it is so important. And if you go to conferences and they have, like we do, a first page critique panel. If you're not familiar, let me enlighten you. First page critique panel is you submit the first page of your manuscript, and it is read in front of everybody. Now, it's an anonymous submission, so people don't know your name. It's anonymous submission, and it is read to a panel of literary agents, editors, publisher reps, whoever they happen to be. First time they've ever heard it, and they give you their cold reaction to it. Sometimes it is a cold reaction, but what I mean is they haven't heard it before. So it is the first time they've heard it, and you can get torn up. And I always want our panelists in that case to you can be critical but also uplifting at the same time, and that's always very, very important to me. But and though you're probably hiding your face or doing all kinds of things that would show that the page is yours, there isn't anybody else in the room that would know that it is yours unless you told them. And that is something that happened. We do like to tell people that we've done stuff. But I recommend you do stuff like this, because hitting the first page is so incredibly important. You have to be able to establish in a very short period of time the action, the world, the character, the setting, time-wise, if that's relevant. And you have to be able to do this in a way that is not just ultimately compelling to the reader, but is compelling to the agents that you're going to pitch to. And yes, we do live in a world where, short of small publishers or even indie publishers who accept submissions directly, the gatekeepers are the literary agents, and you have to be able to work through them, which means you have to play the game. But one of the ways to really get attention is that first page. Obviously, everything after that has to be good too, but if an agent has an opportunity to read your first page, or you have submitted to one of these, the reason why it's so incredibly important is because it is what gives the reader the desire to read beyond that. Most people who are going to pick up a book in a bookstore are going to open it to that first page, and they may not even read the whole first page. They may read that first paragraph to see if they should read the whole page. So you go from a first page to that first paragraph. So I say all this just to get to the ultimate point, which is when you're writing your first page, and please don't try and make sure you nail this in a draft. You're going to get there with edits. Make sure that your first page is driven by action. Don't drop a bunch of details in there that you can actually get out over the course of the story. Drop us right in the middle of action. And it doesn't have to be literal action of like a fight sequence or running or anything like that. It can be in the middle of a conversation. It can be in the middle of an exchange at a cafe or something like that. It is in the middle of an active scene. And it's not at the beginning of it, and it's not at the end of it. It is directly in the middle of it where things are happening, where that moment where if you break it down through these storytelling elements, where you have, that sort of inciting event moment within a conversation or within an action or something like that, that propels the story on that first page forward. Be bold on your first page. Get to the point and make sure that you hit on visual elements and sensory elements. It sounds like an awful lot to put into a first page, but you'll understand if you think about it as you're writing it or as you're looking at your page. Think of it opening sequence of a movie. There's something. Even I was watching recently the movies that made us, in the opening sequence of Forrest Gump. As silly as it is, the little floating feather is still an action, and it's still something that is happening, that is grabbing our attention, and it's moving somewhere, and we can't wait to see where it's going because it's just in the sky when we first see it. And then it lands, and we're there with Forrest, and things are just happening. He's telling a story. It just begins. And you need to think of your first page or even series of first pages, the first several pages. That way you need to be able to give something potent and visual to your readers so that they jump right in with you. All right, we got a couple of questions. Let's see, Jan is asked, is there a place for a character who is unable to make the final transition, whose tragedy is that he can't let go of the past? I think there's always room for a part of a character's journey to not include getting it. It really depends on the story that you're creating. I could say something like Romeo and Juliet and say, well, I would say the kids didn't ultimately get it. And that was the tragedy, which is what it was meant to be. So there's a point to that resistance to change. That's probably the way I would answer it, is if the change or the lack of change or continuing resistance to change that still alters the fundamental world around there, so that, all right, you may still move forward with this flaw, but at least you've resolved all of the other storylines for your character. I will tell you that most readers don't want to get to the end of a story and have gone through this whole journey and realize it's just a Seinfeld character that wasn't going to change to begin with. But I will use Seinfeld as an example. Here's these characters through all these seasons. They never changed at all. Not fractionally. They may have weaved in and out of the possibility of change, but they didn't change. And that was kind of the comedy in it. And they were definitely those characters that we didn't ever really like. We may have been fans of them on the show, but we didn't like them, and not be good with them being thrown in jail at the end of it, because they're just such terrible people. They weren't going to change. So into jail with you. But so I would say there's always a place for that. But ultimately, if you're creating a character that you want your reader or viewer to like, you actually want them to care about, then the only way they're going to be satisfied with the story in the end is if there's actually change, if they actually figure it out, even if like the smallest little parts of their lives say the same. If Andy had never sold all his toys and kept his job, but still realized that he was better being truthful with Trish and being part of her life, I think there would have still been a better reaction to the ending than there was. He still would have been the person he was, but he also would have grown up. He also would have accepted that this truth really wasn't that big of a big deal, wasn't that big of a deal, and that he could be what he needed to be with Trish. And she could be accepting of him as that person, so there's definitely always room for it, but I would certainly say if you want your readers to love your characters and if you want them to be satisfied with the story, you're going to want your character to change to some demonstrative degree, so that we as readers after the whole journey have gotten a payoff for our investment of time and also money because we bought the book or the film or went to see the film, whatever it happens to be. We want to know that our investment was worth it and that we didn't just spend all of that time reading or watching just to be frustrated with the character in the end. Let's see. All right, Georgia, did you say like the catalyst rock bottom is something that happens to your characters? And your protagonist is the cause of this. Those seem to be opposing statements. I'm confused. Yeah, I think probably just getting the whole tired brain thing here. I would say that the rock bottom happens. The catalyst is something that happens to your character to propel them on this journey and to change the world that they're in. I was trying to say that rock bottom kind of serves as a catalyst as well, in that the catalyst is something that that changes the dynamics of the world that the character is in. But with rock bottom, for them to realize that it's up to them to change, they have to realize that they are the cause of it, and they have to be the cause of it. They have to be the one that drove themselves to rock bottom. So the events themselves that are happening may not be through their own actions, if this makes sense, but their resistance. Yeah, if I said that incorrectly, then I apologize for that. Hopefully that clears it up. If it doesn't, then I'll try again. Any other questions? See what Daniel, what you got going here? A couple of words. I'm just trying to read this stuff. How guys have in the chat. See where to see what that is. Okay. Yeah, let me know if you guys have any other questions. We're getting close to the end here. Sherry, I'm a very visual artist, but I would think it might be easier to write a story if you could mentally play and see your story in your head, then describe what you saw. The clearer you saw, the clearer you can describe. I mean, I think that goes back to what I was saying about visual, thinking visually and writing visually. And the reason that I pulled up those images and tried to build stories around them. I agree entirely that the clearer that you can see the image in your head, the clearer that all of the little details are in your head, the more clear your descriptions of them will be, the more clear that you will be able to make it for readers in your story. So I liken that the same to the emotional component of it. If you want your reader to connect to your story, or your viewer to connect to your screenplay, you need to be able to emotionally connect with that theme, with that character, with that plight, whatever it happens to be. You need to have some sense of empathy for it and really understand why the feeling exists. And that will help you be able to tell the story better. I had like one of the scenes that was one of the first images that I had in my head, a still that I had in my head of The Weight of Ashes. It was a very pivotal moment at that point of the bad guys closing in right before we get there. And I had just had this visual in my head. It was a very emotionally charged thing, and I used that to understand the reasons for the character's emotional state at that point. And that allowed me to dig in and draw from my own experiences, and then infuse that into the story. And that helped me like create that emotional dynamic throughout. Let's see. Jan says, I use images I have found to develop my story. It really works for me. Another great thing, again, drawing from visuals to help build out a story. Michael says for, sorry, the double me, the double me. For me, it's usually writing words. It triggers the images for me. Before I start writing the scene, I often only have sort of a snapshot of what happens or what I can see. And that's a good way of doing it too. But you're still starting with that image, and you're using that image to then fuel the words that you use. And those words help you understand and dig into the details of the scene. So again, I still very much believe, and I'll qualify every single thing I've said here before by saying somebody else may tell you something entirely different. And that's because, like for everything, it's all subjective. When you get to personal preference, my personal preference is to work from a visual standpoint and build the story from there. Because that's what creates connective tissue for readers and viewers. Somebody else may feel entirely different about it because it just doesn't work for them, and that's cool. In the end, the visuals are still all about the little details, and whether that's details of a scene, details of landscape, details, the sensory details. Please make sure that when you're writing, you're hitting on sensory details. If I talk about pizza and I talk about the scent, like I walk into a pizza place and I smell the bread, I smell the pizza cooking, I smell the toppings, there's a kind of warmth that comes from being even close to the oven. And it's a hopping place that has a sort of buzz of chatter in the backdrop. You start to connect to those things, and probably because you have experienced them yourself. If you're a normal, sane person, you love pizza. And therefore you know what it smells like, and you know what it tastes like, and you're familiar with that restaurant buzz, and maybe you've been close enough to an oven that whether it's a wood fire stone oven or one of the conveyor belt ovens, if you're close enough to it, even across the counter, you still get that heat. And these are sensations because you have experienced them before. If I include them in my story, you connect to them because you have experienced them. Oregano. Yes, Daniel, exactly. The smell of oregano. And those are the kind of things that you have to think about when you're building your story out. And those are the kind of things I'll say again, put as much of it in there as you can. If you think you have enough, go back and read it again and see if there's anything else you can add. Because the more full that visual is, and that includes that sensory detail, the more full that your description is, the more the reader is going to be immersed in your world and immersed in your story. They won't have to struggle. Think about since like the concept of using big words that aren't commonly used. If you throw down a big word that isn't used very often because maybe you think it's a fancy word or something like that, remember that as your reader is reading, and they're reading it in their head, or even if they're listening to an audiobook, they're in a flow, and you don't want to break that flow. And anything that you do to break that flow is going to take them out of the story. And it can just be that single word, that one word that trips them up. Either maybe they don't know what it is. And wait, I don't even know what that means. Or maybe they've never heard it pronounced before. So, or they've heard it, but they've heard the word, but they didn't know how it was spelled. So now they're trying to work through the pronunciation. Or it's just one of those words that has multiple, the brain to stop and try to find its place. It tries to find it is, and yes, Sherry, too much flowery description can bog you down as a reader, and that's why when I say, go ahead and add as much as you can, and then through your edits, feel the flow. And if you don't do this, please do it. And Georgia, I'm gonna answer your question in a second. If you don't do this, then do it. Read your work aloud, because there's something that happens in life when you keep something in your head versus when you speak the words. Knowing in your head that you love somebody or that you may love somebody doesn't have the power that saying it to somebody does. Acknowledging that something massive has happened in your life that you're resisting, and knowing that truth here, but saying it out loud, makes it real. It changes what it is to you. Your brain has to look at it in a brand new way. So read your work aloud. You will find in those moments when it did get too flowery or the description is too much, it's dragging on a little bit. Your description of a sunset was too long. Whatever it is, you'll hear it. And if you don't hear it, somebody else, an editor is going to hear it, because they don't have the emotional attachment to those words that you do. And and as Michael says, it's insane what hearing your work out loud does. She has a beta reader who reads her stuff out loud to me, and it's been life-changing. Yeah, I know. One of the things that I have said this to Jess, and I said it to many other people, is they're going to do an audio book of this, and there's kind of this moment here where I thought I was going to be the one reading it, which would be really cool because I love it and I enjoy it, but I had this real desire to have somebody else read it to me, and to hear how they process the characters and how they voice the characters. And I get very Southern when I read it, and I love that, and I want to know what it sounds like when somebody else reads my work back to me. So if you have somebody like Michael's talking about that can read your work back to you, do it, because not looking at the words and just hearing them, you will process it so differently. Absolutely. Georgia, you had asked what my shirt says. It says Read Write South. This is Hub City Writers Project, which is part of the Hub City bookstore. This was a shirt that Jess bought for me. Thank you. It's a cool one. Also, Hub City Bookstore is just a great store. If you're ever in Spartanburg, definitely go downtown and check it out, because it's a really cool store and it has a really cool cat. And that's the important takeaway from there. Well, we still got about 5 minutes before we have to stop, which is a hard thing to say. What else we got here? Thinking Works, Minds, Instrument. Okay. All right. Well, any last questions? Because we do have, for those of you who have signed up, we do have our critique and mentoring sessions coming up. You have that schedule. If for some reason you're not ready to take it on today, please let me know as soon as possible. Just send an email and we'll reschedule it. But otherwise, you have your times. These are 15-minute sessions, and I'll have to try to keep us right on schedule. So I look forward to that. For the rest of you, thank you for being here. And Nancy said that about dialogue, and dialogue is something else that I could talk about, but yeah, it's definitely reading it out loud really helps with your dialogue. Really lets you know whether or not you're being stilted or whether or not you've actually hit it right. But thank you all for being here. Once again, please check out Broadleaf Writers. Please, for the sake of me and my wonderful words, investigate The Weight of Ashes. For those of you who don't have a copy coming, if you're interested in buying one signed, I can make sure one gets to you. It's definitely something I'm extraordinarily proud of, and I hope speaks to everything that I've said here, and everything that I have learned over the years that I want to share with everybody. And you will get these recordings. This will be the point where I say, please be patient again, because there is an editing process that comes through. I will make sure it's a good recording and that it uploads fine, and that you aren't going to have any issues downloading it. You will get the videos or links to the videos for you to download. You will get the chats for each one of these, and you will get the resources and character sheets. So those will be things that you can look for. I hope to see some of you in broadleaf programming in the future. I would love to see you at the conference if you're not already signed up for it. Or I would love to see you at future programming in person. Absolutely. Absolutely would love that. If you're interested in purchasing a signed book, just send me an email, or if we're going to meet in person, then just let me know then. And you can find links on my website to go to Independence or Amazon or anything like that. But if you want a signed copy, I can tell you where to get them, or we can deal with it ourselves. Either way. And get some of Andy's videos. Daniel, I'm looking forward to seeing you. You are one that I can't possibly forget. So thank you all, and that is all I've got. First session is you, Daniel, but 4:15 is the first session. Please make sure that you're getting there 5 to 10 minutes beforehand. You will be in a waiting room, and I will pull you in just as soon as we're ready to go. But with that, thank you all. Have a good day. Best to you in your writing. Please connect with me. Please keep up with me. I am very willing to help you with any material you may have and give you my thoughts on it, help you work with it and make it the best thing that it can be. So thank you all, and have a wonderful day.